If you're new to Redstone, you may come across Redstone logic gate tutorials that introduce logic gates that look like these, and you may think to yourself that this is the only way to make an AND gate or an OR gate or a NOT gate. And you will eventually, through trial and error and experimentation, discover that that is not true. You can actually create logic gates that are in all kinds of shapes. And for somebody who's more experienced, you may already know this, and to those I say, you are free to skip this video. But if you are in fact new to Redstone and you aren't aware that you can manipulate Redstone logic gates to your whim, this is the video for you. Starting with the NOT gate, when you're first starting out with Redstone, you may learn that this is the way you make a NOT gate, with redstone going into a block, a torch on that block, and the torch leading to some more redstone. And of course the output of this logic gate is always going to be not the input, hence the name NOT gate. So inputs on, outputs off, and vice versa. However, this is not the only configuration that you can do, of course. You can put the block on top of a torch and take the redstone out like that, and this works just the same. This is still a valid NOT gate. And of course this works on all sides. It doesn't have to be the side totally opposite to the input. For example, here's one that goes off 90. In fact, it goes off to both 90s. And those are also valid NOT gates. You can also go down, of course. You don't have to go up or to the side. So here we have a torch actually leading down to some redstone. And this is also a valid NOT gate. And of course the torch doesn't even have to be on the side. The torch can be on top of the block. So this makes for a valid NOT gate. This makes for a valid NOT gate. And this makes for a valid NOT gate. Many people, when teaching about redstone logic gates, will tell you that the OR gate isn't as important as the other logic gates. And that simply isn't the case. The OR gate is just as important as the other two. In fact, the AND gate is not even possible without the OR gate. So don't underestimate their usefulness. However, as far as configurations is concerned, or variations in configurations, there's really not much we can do to an OR gate. It's basically just a piece of redstone wire. So with that, we can, of course, make it wider and make it longer. Because this is just redstone wire, we can of course extend this as long as the redstone signal can reach, and if it doesn't, we can just place a repeater. However, there are some tricks that are useful to know. For example, here we have a redstone configuration that you can find in circuits from time to time, where this lamp is actually configured as an OR between these two switches, but this one we actually only want to turn on when this switch is on. So with this configuration, we flip this switch, both these lamps turn on, and we flip this switch and only that. Okay, so that's the problem. You're actually getting backflow on the redstone line here, so the easiest remedy for that is to just buffer the line by placing a repeater. If you weren't aware, repeaters not only refresh, but they also act as diodes, so redstone signals won't backtrack through signals that they're not supposed to. So now this configuration works as intended. And then of course you can also create vertical OR gates. They're not as interesting, but they're still quite useful. You can see them in circuits all the time. And usually they incorporate a repeater as well, either to inject power into the block or to pull power out of the block. And then of course we can also use slabs to create OR gates. These are much better just because there's no repeater. There's less of a delay, but redstone signals can't propagate down, so with this configuration you're pretty much only limited to an output being at the very top of your OR gate. Now, because the NOT gate and the OR gate are very simple components, they don't have that wide a range of variations, but our AND gate here is actually a combination of those two logic gates, and because they have that increased complexity, the range of variations that we have for AND gates is actually much wider. If we actually take a closer look at the construction of an AND gate, you can actually see that both inputs are tied to a NOT gate, and then both those NOT gates go to a single piece of redstone. This could be considered an OR gate, and that OR gate is then the input to another NOT gate, which then acts as the output. And this makes sense logically if you were to break it down. This NOT gate could be considered with its OR gate to be a NOR gate, which means its output is only on if both its inputs are off. But because they're connected through NOT gates, both these inputs will only be off when both these inputs are on. And thus, that means that the output will only be on when both inputs are on. Once you're aware that an AND gate is nothing more than this particular configuration of NOT gates and OR gates, all kinds of options open up, as you can start to apply different variations of NOT gates and different variations of OR gates to create different shapes and sized AND gates. For example, here we have a rather funky looking AND gate with a NOT gate down here, your wire up here, and another NOT gate here, all leading to a third NOT gate. And while this does look like a funky circuit, this is still in fact a valid AND gate. And of course we can flip the whole thing vertical too, so here we have a NOT gate and another NOT gate going into this single piece of redstone, creating an OR gate, and then the third NOT gate here. And this makes for a valid AND gate as well, just made vertical. Another variation of this is something like this, where we have this NOT gate and this NOT gate going into this piece of redstone, which feeds into this NOT gate, and this also makes an AND gate. Now, in all these examples, I've showed the inputs to this AND gate to be in close proximity to each other, but that doesn't have to be the case, because there is an OR gate in the way, and OR gates can be made much larger. These inputs can actually be as far apart as they want. In fact, the wire between the two, because it's just a wire, can actually meander in any direction it wants. So even though this looks like a really funky circuit, this still acts as a valid AND gate. And you might not think that an AND gate like this is actually very useful, but there are situations where an AND gate, or a traditional AND gate, won't exactly fit in the space constraints that you've given yourself. And so stretching out an AND gate like this and giving it some funky shapes like this can actually have some uses. And lastly, because OR gates can have as many inputs as they want, and since an AND gate is nothing more than an OR gate with inverted inputs and outputs, you can actually create AND gates with more than 2 inputs. So for example, here we have a 4-input AND gate, and this still works just the same. The output will not turn on until all inputs are on. And of course, because this is a very repeatable pattern, you can of course expand this as long as you want, even past the redstone limit, as long as you use a repeater. And the same rules apply with all the other logic gates. You can of course twist and warp this AND gate to fit any shape you desire. Again, with the AND gate, it's a much more complicated composite logic gate, but when being taught it for the first time, you may be given an exclusive OR gate that looks something like this. And this of course works, but it isn't the only variation that you can create. And so if you really want to break it down how it works, I've got sort of an exploded version here that uses components that we're all familiar with. And basically the way this works is both these inputs actually go to an AND gate, or each one goes to an AND gate, and the other side of these AND gates are on by default, so that means that the signal will always make its way through uninterrupted. However, both these inputs also go to another AND gate, which is actually a NAND gate. So that's an AND gate with an inverted output, so its output is always on unless both inputs are on, in which case it's off. And that actually goes to the other AND gates. So this means that these AND gates will, by default, allow these signals through unless both these signals are on, in which case this signal turns off and the signal is no longer allowed through, meaning the output turns off. And that's basically what you see in these exclusive OR gates like this. We effectively have an AND gate that's created with this input, this torch, and this torch through this OR gate, and another one with this input, this torch again, and this torch through another OR gate. And both of those are controlled by the output of this AND gate here, which is created through this torch, and this OR gate. And all of that is ORed together on the output. Once you're aware of that construction, all of a sudden other options to create XOR gates become available. So for example, here we have a vertical XOR gate, and this is actually my favorite one to use. It's very sleek and compact. But you can see I've color-coded the logic gates here, so here we have a green circuit here, that this is actually an AND gate between this NOT gate, and this NOT gate, connected through this OR gate. And then we have another AND gate through this NOT gate, and this NOT gate again through this OR gate. And those both come together through an OR gate to create the output. And this yellow circuit is actually another AND gate between this input, or this NOT gate, and creating the result on this NOT gate. So it's effectively the same circuit, just flipped on its side, and as a result it is in fact a valid XOR gate. Now in upcoming videos you're going to learn about exclusive OR gates, and you may see a slightly different configuration, Instead of two AND gates with one input that's on by default and off when both inputs are on, you'll actually get two AND gates, and one of them is connected to input 1 and input 2 through an inverter, and the other one is connected to input 2 and then input 1 through an inverter. And this works the exact same way. As you can see, if 1 is on and 2 is off, then one of these AND gates is activated, and likewise with the other way around. And if they're both on, then neither one of these AND gates is activated and the output is off. This is a popular configuration for electronics because it means fewer logic gates. It's not very popular with Redstoners, though, because we have a bunch of wires that cross over each other. So for that reason, we typically stick to this configuration. A little tidbit of information that I want to offer, though, is anytime you see something like this where you have the output of a NOT gate going into the input of an AND gate, you can actually eliminate these two torches because they cancel each other out and just replace it with a repeater. And that works exactly the same. Lastly, if you're not afraid to veer away from solid-state redstone, you can actually create a piston-based exclusive OR gate. And this is actually a really small and compact solution if you're needing something like this. But as you can see, with this current configuration, the redstone signal passes from this lever into this repeater, which then passes through this block and goes onto the output. Just like that. But we also have this repeater that's the opposite of this input, thanks to this NOT gate. So if this one is going to be on, this one's going to be off. And we can select that repeater using the piston and block. So if we retract the piston, we move the block in front of this repeater, and now we're selecting the opposite of this input. And this may sound a little bit confusing, but effectively this creates an exclusive OR. So if we flick this on, the output is on. If we flick this on, the output is on. And if we do both, the output is off. Now obviously there are many other types of configurations of logic gates that you can create, and I would highly recommend trying to discover some of your own just through experimentation. But for now, this information should be enough to point you in the right direction. So, as I said, I would highly recommend experimenting with some of these things and see what kind of circuits you can build yourself.